All right. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Courageous Conversations. My name is Jonathan Mahan. I'm joined today by Jeff and Celia to have a conversation about finding that balance point between showing up with compassion versus setting clear boundaries and taking care of your own mental and emotional health. Because you see, whenever you're engaging with someone, and we're going to use the example here of online, because that seems to be what's happening these days, but of course it implies in person. But when you hear somebody sharing ignorant or bigoted views, you have a choice in how you're going to respond. You can engage in compassionate, non-judgmental dialogue to understand why the person believes what they believe and get them to clarify some things and maybe share your perspective with them back. Or you can tear into them and berate them and tell them just what kind of person they are and just what's wrong with what they're saying. Or you can just ignore them, pretend you didn't hear them, didn't see them, scroll on by. Or even the more advanced version of ignoring is you can completely block that person and no longer ever again see any of their hateful, ignorant comments, views, posts, etc. So the question is, when do you employ each strategy? Because one thing that I've spoken on quite a bit in this podcast is how important it is that we do engage in difficult conversations, non-judgmental conversations with patience and empathy and compassion, because that's the only way that people ever see the light is by being helped to see the light by someone else. Because if you don't do that, we end up in echo chambers. I have a whole episode, literally like, I don't know, 45-minute long episode going into why it is so important for us to have these difficult, courageous conversations. I'll link to that in a recorded version of this. You can go watch that episode. But in this conversation, it's not so much about my views. I'm going to be talking to Jeff and Celia about how they see it and when they see it as appropriate and important to use courageous, compassionate conversations versus when, self-protection and protecting their own mental and emotional health is important. And when drawing a hard line and a boundary, kicking back or pushing back on what someone says when that's important. So I guess as a, bit of a disclaimer here, this conversation is meant to be valuable to anyone who is forced to come in contact with people whose views make them angry. So it doesn't matter what your political orientation is or what your views are. There are people online who, when you see their views, you're going to have to choose to either, again, attack them, ignore them, or help them see the light. Now, the three of us here are left-leaning progressives. So most of our examples and most of our language will reflect that. But trust me, you could be a libertarian and still benefit from this episode. You could be a Republican and still benefit from this episode, because we all have to make those choices about how to engage when we see someone spewing something we consider wrong and ignorant online. So with all that being said, Jeff and Celia, I would love to know from you guys, from your perspective, why would you ever engage in empathetic, compassionate conversation with someone whose views are ignorant and bigoted?
Jeff, do you want to take it? I can go next.
After you, Celia.
Okay. So thank you for that question, John. I was thinking about it this whole morning, and there's always something that you want to initiate in your conversation, So I want to introduce myself so that the audience would know my perspective. I am an Asian immigrant. I identify as a trans person of color. And I have gone through so many situations in my life where I have been marginalized. Though I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a musician, I'm a dad, a father of a 21-year-old daughter, I still, want to identify as dad for her. And I'm married, but in spite of all that, people only look at me as a trans person. And and also I'm a Christian. I'm a evangelical Christian. I belong to the evangelical Christian community. Having the second generation Christian in my family, my dad was a Hindu and he was a convert. It makes so much sense for me in order for me to really believe in some of the aspects that both sides think about, when you're talking about Bible or your political views. Because I have a lot of friends in my own circle. They come home and we all eat together on the same table. 50% of my friends are Republicans. So I do have a point of view. Always I'm thinking about how do I communicate without prejudice? How do I communicate without, just fear? But I think one thing that I found was the bottom line in most of these conversations is fear. A fear of, hey, you know better than me, or I know better than you. I don't want you to convince me, or you don't have to be convinced. There's always a little subtle feeling of fear that happens, or it runs in the minds of people. And that could lead to a lot of things which could probably go beyond their personal boundaries. And most of the time, in my opinion, people are hurting. As human beings, we are all hurting. And sometimes this hurt can go in terms of words, it can be in terms of action, it can be in terms of different responses. Like when they see a trans person, they get angry at the trans person because you should not exist. I've had people come and call me faggot when I was when I was walking on the road in Pennsylvania. I have people call me, hey, go back to your country. A lot of things have happened. But there are times when I need to protect my own core personal self, which is more important. And that's where I think if we are not called to be in that space, it's so important for us to make sure that we are not in those conversations. What I mean is, if you're not called to be an advocate, if you're not called to be an activist, don't do that because it's hurtful. It's tiring. And so it's so important because as a trans person, I need to advocate for myself every day. It becomes tiring. And my friends ask me, they say, Celia, how do you do it? How do you wake up every day? And when you go to the grocery store, when you're driving to the, gas station, people look at you and they make these comments. And how do you manage with that? And I keep telling them that, sometimes I only believe that sometime, someday, that these people will learn to be empathetic towards people like me. It's not me, but people like me. And that's where I just wanted to leave this conversation here from Jeff, your perspective as well. So.
Yeah, no, I love what you just said, especially around the fear part, right? My dad is from the Caribbean. My mom's from the Philippines. I grew up in, predominantly white suburb of Chicago, where, I just had to like deal with everyday racism. After a while, it just became like a normal thing, and all the microaggressions and everything that I had to deal with that. And now I help navigate really difficult conversations at companies, and it's tough. And, I mentioned this to John before, but I recently did an experiment where I had a conversation with someone that was far right leaning and I'm far left leaning, on YouTube in front of all of her, YouTube live people. And it lasted 3 hours, and I was like, oh my gosh. But it's what Cecilia said, a lot of what we were first talking about was on a surface level, how we were almost scared of one another, scared of each other's opinion, and almost like this person's about to attack me. So almost that first hour was just like getting over that fear. Then that second hour was like, okay, let me try to actually understand you, and third, like, okay, is there any way in which there are any values that actually align? Like there's gotta be something, because I remember when I used to do a ton of campaign work, it's not as bad out there when you're actually knocking on doors than when you look at it on TV. People are nuanced, right? And I remember I've lived in the Bay Area for so long, and it was just like, I can't believe 71 million people voted for that man. I'm just going to give up on those 71 million people. That's 71 million people.
Mm.
Okay? And everyone has a totally different reason for why they chose to make that decision. And we have to be able to recognize nuance and not like set ourselves up as the hero all the time and everyone else as a villain, because that's like, come on, that's what we did when we were like 5, and we're better than that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the points that I wanted to also make is there was one situation in my life where I, as you've shared about the YouTube, I had one situation where the mayor of our city was not willing to give us a proclamation during Pride season. It's just that he's a mayor of the city, and every mayor of the neighboring cities were calling us and saying, we want to recognize the LGBTQ community and we want to give you the Pride proclamation. And they did not want to do it. And this man did not want to give us, I'm not going to take names, but he didn't want to give us in our hand, because to him, he was a senior pastor of a church, and he believed that it was against his faith. But this is a mayor of a city, and you're not talking about some pastor in a church. So I was conflicted in my mind as to what would I do. And a lot of people in our city were like, what on earth is this man doing? Let's all revolt and let's all go stand and make a big noise. And they called me and said, Celia, you need to come, you have to be a part of it. And I was leading the LGBTQ, so I went with them. I went to the city hall. I took a piece of paper. I wrote my name down and said, I want to speak. And they were like, okay, are you sure you want to speak? Because everyone is very angry. We all want to yell at this man. And so I said, sure, let me do it. So I went and stood, and they said, you got a minute. And I looked at him and said, sir, I live in this city. I'm a dad. I have a child who is 21 years old, and she grew up in the city. My wife lives here. I work here. This is not the life that I chose, but this is my life. I want you to know that, sir, I'm a Christian as well, like you. I respect your biblical views, but I want you to know that in Bible, there are people like me that's quoted. And I want you to be more compassionate as a pastor and as a Christian. And I would love for you to do this next year, even if not this year. And I just said that, and I walked from that room, and his secretary came running behind me. And she said, hey, come, sorry, ma'am, can you, whatever you did, keep doing. And that's what is important. I want you to know that. And I walked out of the room, and my friends were like, what did he do? I was thinking to myself as to, if you want to change a person, go to the point. Just go down to the bare bones and tell this person that I love you in spite of what you are, but I hope you would change your views. And that man was looking at me. He didn't have any words, and I could see him smile. And he was just staring at me and thinking, oh my God. And I wrote a letter to him, and I thanked him for the time that he gave me. And was I, did I have prejudice? Of course I did. Because he did not recognize a person like me. There are 30,000 people like me in that city. We live here. But he just completely dismissed us because of his biblical values. And when I confronted him based on the biblical values that he had, it made more sense. But not all of them are Christians, right? We're not dealing with people who are Christians. But there are times when we are having co-workers. There are times when we're having, folks who are just next to us or on the internet who are trying to be, hey, I don't care who you are. I don't care about your faith. But I don't like you. I faced a lot of person. In fact, in my recent post on Marjorie Taylor Greene, I had written that she said, male and female, and this is science. And I had posted that one. And if you go to my post and if you look through that, you will see a lot of people who have commented in such a negative way. And there was one man who said, this is none of your business. And he's a retired person. And he wrote to me saying that it's none of your business. And it's and this is how the world is. You better accept it. And he just wrote it. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to respond. If I was the same Celia 2 years back, unfriend. You're out of my book. And I was feeling sorry for that man because he's a retired person. He seems to be well educated. And I was thinking, what do I tell him? And I didn't have any words, I hope he will read through the post and he will understand, at least you can't completely bring them from the positive to the negative or from the negative to the positive, but bring them somewhere in between. Park them in a neutral zone, and you have to come to the neutral zone as well.
Right.
And that's the important part, where both have to come to this neutral zone and then say that, okay, I'm going to keep my views, I'm going to park and I want to listen to you.
Right.
Why do you hate me if you don't know me? And that's what Daryl Davis told the Ku Klux Klan leader. And it was so powerful to me. I want to ask that question as to, why do you hate me? Because you don't know me.
Right. I mean, so many things come up. I love this conversation. And I got chills when you shared, what you shared, at the town hall meeting. There's such a lack of humanity right now for us trying to understand one another. And I think of my play mentor, Gwen Gordon, that talks about how, people either live in a world where they see it as a playground where they're able to explore. Many people live in a world where they see it as a proving ground where they have to constantly get validation from others. And then there's a lot of people that live in what we would consider a battleground where everybody's a threat. And, for some people on, both opposite extremes, they see everyone as a threat. And it's a really sad, scary world for them to live in, but that's their world. So when I hear people say like, I hate you or I don't like you, what I'm really hearing them say is, I don't like myself. I hate myself. There's a part of me, you are triggering something in me that I have not addressed. And I think, I forgot, I think it was Yogi Bhajan that said this, but something around, people's opinion of you has more to do with their relationship with themselves than with you, right? And I remember when I would do a lot of campaign work, we utilized Marshall Gans, a community organizer, Harvard professor, who did this whole story of self strategy for the Obama campaign. And it was all designed off of stories of self, where the strategy was we would practice for a day just working on our 3-minute story of self to understand like, why, what am I doing here? Why am I part of this campaign? And then working on the story of us of like, how are we all connected? And then finally the story of now of like, okay, why do we need to take action right now? And working on those stories was so powerful, not only because you then connected your values with everybody else in the group, but when you went and knocked on doors, I remember this guy came out, I was in Oregon in this really far right-wing Republican trailer park area. And this guy came out with his shotgun and his, flag waving, and his dog comes out, and I'm freaked out, and I'm like, I'm gonna die in South Oregon. This is how this is gonna end for me. This is so disappointing. I did not plan it. And he comes out and he smiles at me and he's like, hey, Obama, I love Obama. So no, you don't know what people are, and where they stand until you actually ask. And I think we're not leading enough with curiosity and being open to experimenting and doing what you did, Celia, because we want to be right all the time. And my friend Eric Bailey always says, like, in any conversation you have, you either choose to be right or you choose to understand, but you can't do both. And we want to do both. We want to feel like we're, at the best level while also pretending that we understand. And we just can't. You just got to choose.
Absolutely, yeah. I love that. The person said, I love Obama. I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to die? Oh, thank goodness.
I was going to die. Now I'm hugging this man with tobacco, in his beard. It's great.
I know. I've been in one situation in Arizona where I think I had talked about it on LinkedIn as well. This person was cutting my car and, in one of the intersections, and he stopped his car, looked at me and said, go back to your country. And that's the time I was thinking maybe I should say something to him. And I did not want to say anything because I was scared. Now, those are situations where you don't have a rational conversation with a person who is like really angry. Right. And it's always good to kind of leave that space and just, protect yourself first, because those are certain areas where sometimes I feel like, when you are an activist and you want to prove your point,
right,
you're really not proving your point.
Right. And it's just like, what's your goal? Like really, and is your goal realistic right now? Because if he cut you off and you turn to him and be like, let's have this argument, what's the likelihood that he's going to be like, you're right? I don't know what I was thinking. But we strive for that all the time, right? We're always striving for that one Hail Mary moment when they will turn to us and be like, you are so right and I am so wrong. And that's just not how it plays out. I don't think anyone that I've ever come to a basic understanding with has never told me I'm correct. They've actually come to the conclusion on their own and then believe it's their idea, not the idea that I planted it.
Right. Yeah. In another situation, it was very interesting. I was walking in Pennsylvania near a mall, and there was a truck full of young boys, and they passed me and they started yelling at me, faggot. And I was, I didn't hear it. Maybe my Asian ignorance was playing it at the time. I was like, what are you saying? I can't hear you. They were like, faggot, faggot. They were just yelling at me. And I was like, oh, okay. And I smiled at them like this. And then they were like, what the heck? And, they just drove away. And I was only after they drove away, it hit me that, oh my God, what would have happened if they had stopped the truck and beaten me up?
Right.
And fortunately, I wasn't reacting in a very different way because probably they were wanting me to react that way.
Right.
And I was just smiling at them. And I literally probably even took my hand a little bit to wave also because I didn't understand what they were trying to say. I thought they were very friendly. But those are situations where, sometimes you go through this, sometimes ignorance is a bliss. But, but it's yeah, I many a times, I think over a period of time, I've lived in this country for more than a couple of decades, but I've learned to be patient, and sometimes I've learned to be, I would say, the right kind of anger.
Right.
You need the right kind of, it's not the anger that's kind of beating up someone, but the right kind of anger to change something. If you are angry at me, I want to change the society, or what is it that's making you angry, so that we can have a civilized conversation.
Right.
Civility. There's a lack of civility between people. And those days when I have a conversation with my team colleagues, we used to agree. I used to say, okay, I hear you, but I want to agree to disagree.
Mm-hmm.
And I would do it in such a simple way, and no one was yelling across the room. But these days, agree to disagree has gone through the window now. It's like, you better agree now. You better listen to me. And you know what, Jeff? I think most of the time it's the media as well.
Yeah,
I'm not going to completely blame that the left side media or the right side media, but the way in which they portray the information that you get, I literally stopped looking at my Facebook and reading because all my views are all about left.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, what is the right really saying about this? Sometimes I used to think about it. And I stopped looking at it. When I posted some of my articles in certain places where there were people of both sides, I saw that they were very offensive. And I was thinking, out of 100 posts, almost 10 would be absolutely crazy, like negative, like I hate you kind of posts. And I used to think that this is what critics need. You need people who are actually disagreeing with you. And I was thinking, what's the worst that can happen? Are you going to come find my address and come and kill me? No, I don't think you're going to waste your ticket for that. So, let me just, let's just put your comment there and, let's move on.
Right. And I think that, because that question of like, why would I choose to disengage? I think it's also really important to identify for, when should I be telling anyone else how they should go and do their thing? Because I think a lot of times when I'm having conversations with people are like, well, I wouldn't want to do it that way. I don't want to have a conversation with a Trump supporter. I would never have a conversation. And I was like, okay, I'm not trying to force my beliefs upon you. And I think a lot of times people feel like if you are trying to have this conversation, you're like, whoa, you expect me to do this as well? It's like, no, man, do you, wherever you feel comfortable. Because I know people, activists that are like, I'm never going to be engaging in that. That is not a productive use of my time. Is more productive organizing the people that, need to be organized. I have friends that are like, I don't even interact with, white supremacist dudes anymore. Just like, they're just out of my life. And some people can operate that way. Okay, great. But then for others that have to navigate in this world, I think we have to be open to, when was the last time you had a hard conversation? What does that conversation look like? And can you have that conversation in the context where you are not putting yourself in danger? Because when I'm doing this at companies, I ask people, I'm like, before you engage in this conversation, do you feel comfortable enough to have this without feeling like you might lose your job? Because that's a real thing for some people, right? But what's interesting about what you said earlier about pain and fear is like when I was having this discussion with this person that was, far right leaning, she was telling me about pain and suffering of feeling ostracized. And the pain and suffering she explained sound exactly like a lot of my friends that are organizers for Black Lives Matter. So it was like same pain. And then she would be like demonized. She was like, well, I got attacked by BLM the other day. And I was like, someone attacked you? But like in her eyes, these people who I guess potentially represented this organization attacked her. And for me to be like, well, that's not true would be to deny her experience. And I think we do that so much here. It's so insulting when we're like, actually, that did not happen to you. Your pain and suffering did not happen. And by ignoring someone's belief, we're actually then ignoring their experience. And that is when that becomes really harmful. And that's when they start demonizing you back, in my opinion.
Right. The one of the experience I wanted to share, because what I'm dealing with today is, one thing I was talking about is not just my being trans, but also the intersectionalities, right? Brown person, and how am I standing up for another person, especially the Asian community is being targeted now, and especially when and it's been over the years, right? You had a lot of Muslim community, Sikh community being misunderstood. There were lots of things that were happening, and I remember teaching my Sunday school kids, and I am a youth minister. I wouldn't say minister. I just conduct the youth sessions for the youth in my church, and I talk to them about all the issues that are human related. So I don't talk about politics. I would say that if you see a person getting beaten on the road, what would you do? And you could see that the younger generation seem to understand and accept much more faster than the older generation. And I'm very hopeful. That's what gives me the hope that, you may not change the baby boomers and, the Gen Zs, I would say the Gen Y and Gen X, but we have a lot of millennials. Almost, 75% of the workforce in 2025 is going to be millennials. And you're looking at a lot of them who are thinking differently. They're not thinking about man or woman. They're thinking about their identities. They're thinking about what they're passionate about, environment, or they're thinking about so many other intersectional identities, which are so important right now.
Right.
And that's where, and I can give you an example even within my own family. Right? My daughter, when she was 15 years old, she accepted me in 25 minutes. My wife, whom I have married for, right now we are entering into our 24th year of marriage. And it took 17 years for me to convince my wife that, sweetheart, I'm different. I'm going through a problem. And I kind of had to keep on educating her. And she was defense. She was like, no, you can change. You're not a trans person. You're a businessman. You are successful. We have a wonderful life. Don't do this. It's going to be difficult. And for me, and that's what my entire life was based out of, denial. I was in denial. And then I told her, sweetheart, I want you to know, let me educate you. And once I started doing that, first thing is I had to educate myself.
Right.
I didn't know what was going on. So first thing was, how do I educate myself to educate someone who is not willing to accept me? And this was my own wife. And I didn't want to have a divorce because she didn't understand me. This was so important and crucial for me. And so I started reading articles, I started looking at science, and I started reading so much of material about people like me. And once I got to the point and I could really pull down those words that made sense, I said, sweetheart, I'm going through gender dysphoria. And that's all I told her. She said, what do you mean by that? I said, this is my birth gender and I have a preferred gender. And there are people like me, 1 out of 100 in this world. And the suicide rate in our community is almost 41% with LGBTQ. I just gave her numbers and facts. And she's an analyst. She works in a bank as a financial analyst. To her, people are like, oh my God. Oh, I didn't know that. So how can I help you? Within 5 minutes, our conversation changed. And then I was like, So I think to me, with my personal life experience, I could see that my daughter didn't need any numbers or facts. She was like, Dad, I love you in spite of who you are. Um, so don't worry about it.
Why the difference between 17 years and 20 minutes? Why do you think it's so start? That's so fascinating.
I know. I always tell the story. In fact, my daughter's going to be in one of the panels with me to tell her perspective about how she has accepted me, which is the first I'm going to do in next month. But my wife, I told her about this panel too. I said, I'm going to have a good conversation with one of my friends from Denver and another friend, Jeff. We're going to have this conversation. And she said, what is it about? And I said, tough conversations, sweetheart, tough conversations, really tough conversations. And to me, a family life is so easy. It's like we're just human beings. It's not about I'm the man, I'm going to bring home the bacon, you make food ready, you wash the dishes, you do my laundry. None of that matters in a house. And I mean, we have a very mixed gender role within a house, and it's mostly, I would say, humanity, putting humanity first, putting love first is so vital in your family. And I think that's what is the key in many aspects when you have friendships. My best friend from college is a Trump supporter. And we invited him home and I asked him, hey, why are you doing this? What's wrong with you? And he said, hey, I just want to try something different. This was before, when Obama was after Obama's period. So I was sitting and listening to his viewpoint and I was thinking, okay, if you want to try, go ahead and do it. But at the point I was so angry because I was thinking we were in the music band together. We did everything together. How could you betray me? How could you vote for this guy? And to him, it was like, hey, I have my own brain and this is what I want to do.
Right. And what's so interesting about that is I think a lot of times we attack people's character, right? Instead of just addressing like, okay, what is their behavior right now? And, because we really think as if they're attacking me. And I remember when I was speaking to another Trump supporter and she's like, well, do you agree with, going to the protest? I remember her telling me this. She goes, you should come to one of our Trump rallies. They're great. And I was like, no. I'm like, I feel like I'd be so damn like, I don't want to get hugged there, like I don't want to go to that and I don't want to go to a NASCAR rally. Like I just don't want to go. And she was like, no, they're actually really great places. And I was like, okay, you got to tell me more, right? Like lead with curiosity. And she goes, no, people are open. They're very friendly. We have these really interesting conversations. And I was like, what about all the Confederate flags? What about all the Nazi flags? And she's like, yeah, those are there, but I don't agree with those people. And I was like, well, then why do you go if you don't agree with them? And she's like, this is the last bastion where I am accepted because I've been ostracized from former work colleagues. I've been ostracized from former friends. I've been ostracized from family members. So another place to go. Like these are my community. So if they accept me, then I can ignore that part of it. And I was like, oh wow, I don't understand that. And also I can feel what that means to be ostracized. So really looking for the one thing that you actually identify with, that you can feel that's the part, that pain where we have shared pain. We have a shared story when it comes to feeling ostracized.
I think another viewpoint that I wanted to make is even within the left community, right? When you talk about the liberal community, what kind of issues that I have faced, I can tell you that. I wanted to share another story. I mean, most of my experiences are based on my story.
Right.
In 2015, I came out in my community and my article came out in the local newspaper. This is, Celia is Daniel, and Daniel has come out as trans. And, there was a big article and it was from my heart. I just spoke and it was out there. And I was so happy because, oh, wow, people, I came out with my story. And the letters to the editor was terrible, terrible. And all the news articles that came out was, you're an abomination. You need to go to hell. You are a man in a dress who needs medical help. And I took the newspaper in my hand, and every time I would see the response to the editor, it was so heartbreaking. And all of them were, I didn't know what to do. And I was thinking to myself as to, where do I go from here? What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to the transgender community. I was telling them that, hey, look, this is what has come. And my friends said, Celia, you're not transitioned. I was like, what? What does it mean? See, we have all medically transitioned, and we are, the true trans people, and you're not, because you have not transitioned. I said, I don't want to transition because I have other medical issues. They were like, no, you need to transition. And to me, that hit like it was even more worse than all these hurtful language. And I was thinking to myself as to, you are boxing me again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to come out as a gender non-binary, and you're trying to put me in a box because
Mm-hmm.
it worked out for you. And I told them that, no, I'm not going to transition. And they said, you're a cross-dresser. You're not serious about your life. You just love dressing around. You love attention. You're a brown person. We're all white community people. We have other issues to deal with. And I was thinking to myself as to, what on earth have I got into? And I sat in my car. I was literally crying in my car. And I told myself, to hell with everything.
Right.
I'm going to do what I want to do. And you know what I did? I went for a gun rally here. It was about the gun control rally. It was nothing about trans. And I said, I'm going to be in spaces where people need me, and they are not trans. And I went for that. I went for the immigration issues. I fought for the immigration issues when the children were locked in cages. I stood in spaces where I felt like I need to be there. But sometimes even within your own community, even within the LGBTQ community, you can feel that you don't belong there.
Right.
That's how I felt. And Caitlyn Jenner just lives a couple of exits from where I live. She's in Malibu. We are in Westlake area. So I kind of sensed that a lot of children were coming out, and they were saying, but Caitlyn Jenner is a Republican. She's a trans, but she's a Republican. We shouldn't support her. And I was thinking to myself that I wanted to write a letter to her saying that, how does it feel for you to come out honestly and still feel rejected within your own community? I know she felt that. I mean, I feel sorry for her when with all the ostracizing within the community happened. But that was a very good learning for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point about what I reference as the get out racists, right? See, I think it's really easy for one to demonize someone that's like overtly racist, everyone that has tiki torches. But it's the get out racists that concern me. The people that would vote for Obama for a third time, the people that consider themselves, far, on the left, right? But aren't willing to actually give up. I know a lot of people that are like working in the DEI space that there are people that are working in the DEI space that actually want to change power dynamics. And then there's others that are just doing it to appease those companies, but they don't want to actually remove any power from the people that are in power, right? Because that means you have to you have to take a step back. This is why I respect John so much. He's taking a step back right now and being like, yo, y'all do your thing, because this is not my space. There's not enough people actually doing that. And I think, for a lot of people on the left, we have to be looking at ourselves of how are we calling ourselves out on our own bullshit? Are we actually taking our own advice, or are we just getting really good at telling everyone else how bad they are? And my friend Damian Taylor told me this analogy that I just loved about what is it? Allyship. Mm-hmm. Or performative allyship. And he was like, basically, it's like this. The oppressed is on the first floor of an apartment. The oppressor's on the second floor with, potential allies. And then the oppressors on the second floor just allow a flood to happen, and they flood the whole first floor. So then someone comes down from the second floor, and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's flooded. Oh, let me help you clean it up. Oh, this is horrible. Let me run a GoFundMe campaign. Maybe I'll post social media about how no one should ever flood floors on the first floor. And the whole time that oppressed person is like, the issue is not my issue. Like, I shouldn't have to deal with this. This is your stuff, but it's coming down to me and I have to deal with it. And, you know, why don't you just handle it upstairs and talk to your neighbor or your family member to actually address that issue, instead of coming down here and being like, I'm your best friend, when you really are not addressing the true issues that are going on. You're really not addressing the true power dynamics that exist. And I think we have to ask ourselves, are we actually doing that, or are we just being very performative, you know, and resharing a post and being like, well, I'm done for the day. My activism is done.
Mm-hmm. I know the passive activism is something that I talk about, that, oh, I'm not going to eat in Chick-fil-A because they don't support LGBTQ, or, you know, I don't want to go to this place because this person gave money to Trump. I'm not going to eat in McDonald's. My point is not that. I mean, that may be working for you, but that is not activism. Activism is beyond that, you know, going out and really getting wet, you know, standing out on the street corner, or really making a difference in the lives of people. And if you want to support Black Lives Matters, and, you know, you need to be out there. You need to be in spaces where our Asian community, you need to be in spaces where they are not there. Yeah. And the first thing I learned from my friend was, I asked him, you know, I'm a brown person. How can I be an ally for you? And he said, Celia, don't be my savior.
Right.
Don't be my savior. Right. And a second thing I'm telling you, second point here is, be my mouthpiece in spaces where I'm not there. And that's all I need from you. And of course, he said, you know, educate yourself about Black Lives Matters. And I started reading these articles, and I was a big advocate. My entire family, my wife, my daughter, we were all an entire advocating for the Black Lives Matters within the South Asian community. And while I was working in those spaces, you know, the other issues started off, right? The Blue Lives Matter started off. And here I am having a friend, and I have been to LAPD and spoken to LAPD about trans rights issues. And I know there are compassionate people in LAPD too. There are some people who don't understand. But I went to the police station and I literally educated them. And so to me, lives matter, of course. I understand about the Black Lives Matter. It's so important. But to me, I cannot completely throw the police force out of the window and say, you know, they don't matter at all. Because my friend who is trans is in LAPD. And he reached out to me and said, Celia, I am in LAPD and I'm having so many problems because the trans community hates us right now. Mm-hmm. And we are going through a lot of mental stress. So can you recommend a few therapists who will be compassionate to the police force? Mm-hmm. Now, here I am sitting across intersectionalities about, you know, so many things. And I'm thinking about, how can I help you? And I got a lot of therapists. I reached out to my therapist friends and I said, we need to help them. Right. And a lot of them stepped forward, stood and they helped the community. You know, I think there are times when I always say this. I didn't choose to be a transgender activist. Though I fought for my advocacy, I came out as a transgender activist, but I turned into a human rights activist. Mm-hmm. To me, that mattered more. So that's what I tell the trans community or the Asian community or the brown community, that, you know, there are lots of issues that matter to us, but if we can open our eyes and help people, if you see a person on the floor because they just stumbled and they just fell down, the first instinct is to go and help them out. Hey, are you okay? Can I help you? Mm-hmm. If the person was carrying a Confederate flag and he had stumbled and fell down on the floor, on the street, I would still go down and I'll help him and say, hey, are you okay? Right. And then he would look at me thinking, you're a brown person and I'm supposed to hate you, but you're asking me to help you. Wow, you have sent the message to him.
Because you're leading from a place of humanity and you're leading from a place of love, right? Yeah. And I think we have to explore, I would ask the listeners, are you actually doing that now? Like, are you actually attempting to have hard conversations? Are you actually putting yourself in places where you are the minority, right? You know, when was the last hard conversation you actually had about about certain issues, whether that is currently what's happening in the Asian American community or what's happening with BLM, right? And then thinking about, well, does this work? Does this not work? I've seen the positive impact that this has had, right? That I have, like, when you lead from a place of humanity, as you mentioned earlier with Daryl Davis and him being able to get 200 KKK members to leave, just like in my own experience, me simply leading from a place of trying to be curious and try to understand, when I was having that conversation, with that person that I disagreed with completely on that YouTube page, other people were like, this is really interesting. I think I'm going to have a conversation with someone that I disagree with. Just showing that this is possible, that there can actually be some level of respect from two people that disagree. Because right now the echo chambers are so well established that I don't think people believe they can even sit down and watch Fox News without boiling, right? And if we're at that point, it's going to be really difficult for us to ever come to a point where we can try to understand one another and see each other's humanity.
One thing I'd love for you guys to touch on before we wrap up here is, you've definitely shared that you believe in compassionate conversation, but certainly I'm sure there are times in your life when you still decide, you know what, not right now, right? Right now, we're going to go ahead and block this person, ignore that comment, or maybe even draw a hard line and say, that's not okay. What you just said is not okay, right? So in your own life, how do you make that call, right? What's your advice to someone on how to make the call of when to engage with compassionate conversation, when to just ignore them, block them, cut them off, and maybe when to draw a hard line and call out bad behavior, right? Because I'm sure you've done at least some of each in your life. Yeah. How do you make that determination?
I think you have to, I would think I have to trust my instincts of okay, what's the goal here? Is it going to be productive for me to have this conversation right now? Am I in a safe space to have this conversation, right? As Celia talked about earlier, in a charged protest environment where there's an anti-protest and a protest, not the best place to be well, let's just all of a sudden have this conversation, because everyone's charged and people are cheering and be yeah, get him. So you're not setting yourself up for a lot of success in that situation, right? Mm-hmm. So am I in a safe space? Do I feel like I'm coming from a place of understanding? And where am I at mentally? Because sometimes I don't have the patience. Sometimes I'm just not ready that day to deal with that. So it's better for me not to show up and try to feign, that I'm open when I'm not, and just be patient. I think Celia said it best of just this, we're thinking about this for the long game, right? We're talking about having hundreds of conversations over the next decade in order to heal these wounds. We're not going to be able to do that. Everyone wants to do it right now, but they also want to be right while also healing the wounds. It's you can't do that. You have to check your own privilege, your own power, your own conception of reality, and really question whether there's a way in which I can find compromise with this person or not. And if I'm not there, then I follow my intuition and trust my instincts.
I think, in my opinion, there are two kinds of people. You can always educate people who are ignorant, but you cannot educate people who are arrogant. Mm. So I have come across both kinds of people. And if they're ignorant, you can tell them that, hey, this is what it is. They will understand. But if they're arrogant, they're so bigoted that they cannot listen to you anymore. And they just want to thrust their opinion on you. And recently, there was a trans person who actually unfriended me because she didn't like my viewpoint on certain things, which I didn't agree upon, because there are people like that too. And that was a political viewpoint. And, sometimes there are people, even within our own community, who might not like you. So it's important to know when to draw boundaries, when to be diligent in what you do. I remember there was a man who actually wrote in my post when I spoke about something. He said, hey, great job, man. He mentioned that in my post, and I was so offended. I was thinking, Do I confront him, tell him that, hey, you're wrong, you shouldn't call me man? Do I look like a man to you? And this is on LinkedIn. And I was so upset for almost like a week. And then I thought, let me wait for some more time. And I already typed in a message nicely here saying that, you are so this one, you cannot do this. And I typed in an email and I waited and I waited. And then I put a question mark saying man and a question mark. And I left it. After 2 weeks, that man responded saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I just addressed everybody as man. I'm so sorry. He left it. And for me, I thought, oh my God, if I would have written this email and if this message would have probably created now I knew he was a conservative person, but he at least respected me at that point, and that mattered a lot to me. I think we need to be patient sometimes. We have the time to do it. But I've been in a situation where there was a 65-year-old lady. After my speech, she came and I sat in her table. I was sitting next in our little circle. She looked at me and said, "Oh, so you are a man who dresses like this, and you have all your male parts?" And I was like, "Oh my God, really?" And I was just spinning my eyes like that, and then the women in our table, they all jumped on her and they were like, how dare you talk like that, Celia? She just told about her. And you should have seen that lady's response. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I've never seen a trans person and this is the first time I'm seeing you. And I started laughing and I said, yeah, you're right. I am a man. And there are people like me who are going through a lot of these issues. And now I identify as a trans woman. I was born as a man. And she said, Celia, don't misunderstand me. I'm learning. And after the meeting, I spoke to her and I felt that her eyes were filled with compassion. But I found that ignorance sometimes are people, there are people who are ignorant, we can change. But there are people on LinkedIn or even on Facebook and even in person, I've experienced them. The arrogance is right on you. And
Right.
they're looking at me thinking, so I've seen a lot of South Asians. I don't know if South Asians are listening to this call. The first thing they look at me and they think, oh my God, so you are in this call too? You are a hijra and you are in a call like this? You cannot have a life like this. You should be in the streets begging. I've had a lot of look from people from South Asian community too. You know why? Because there's bias all the time. And there's a bias. They want to box you in those boxes. And when you're out of the box and you're doing something that is more different from what they are used to, you're actually creating, you're confusing them, because the work that they have created. And when we start speaking out of that, it widens their horizon and they start looking at you with empathy. And I always tell the community that when you look at a trans person, don't have empathy. I don't need empathy. I need empowerment. That's very important. So these conversations, even with any Republican group or independent or Democratic group, my conversation is, I have seen a lot of people in all these circles who are ignorant about the people of color, who are ignorant about a lot of things happen because they're brought up that way. So I've seen people in all sides willing to learn, unlearn certain things, willing to learn and help. And those are the people who are real humanitarians. They may not agree with all the policies and stuff, but they are at least willing to come to that neutral zone.
Yeah, and what I hear is that by you simply existing, sometimes you are expanding the paradigm for some people, and some people are like, "Okay, I'm open to this new reality," and others are so scared. They're so scared of what that might be and how they may not have power in this new normal, right? And I just want to respond to the part about the assumptions. Assumptions is what gets us into so much trouble. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what assumptions are we currently making that make us always the hero in our story and everyone else the villain? And then the more we're able to actually ask that, I think the more then we are going to be able to have conversations that we didn't think were possible before.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, guys. We're we're up on time here, so we'll wrap. But obviously, we could keep talking on these topics forever. Celia, you have so many fantastic and in some cases horrifying stories to share, and I appreciate you opening up and sharing those. And to both of you, thanks for having this conversation. You know, this is a very complex, nuanced topic, but it's so important to cover, right? And myself, you know, I don't know about your past, but for me, I very much used to be in the camp of, you know, the best way to deal with ignorant people is to just cut them out of your life altogether, or to attack them and berate them, right? And it's only been recently that I've realized, hey, wait a minute, while that might feel good, the impact that leaves is actually the opposite of what I want, right? It actually makes it less likely that these people ever see the light, and actually makes them more dangerous because, you know, as you shared, Jeff, that person felt so at home in Trump rallies because everyone in her life and her family who was on the left had ostracized her. So it's like, all right, well, let's look at the real impact of that ostracization. Did it make her see the light and say, oops, I was wrong, let me come back over to your camp? Or did it drive her further into the other camp, right? So I appreciate you guys having these conversations with me, and you know, my commitment to you and everyone out there who are members of marginalized groups is that I won't just step away and leave this problem. Because the truth is, if I see transphobia on display and say, well, I won't stand for that, block, I've now made that person disappear from my world. But guess what? They're still in the world, and there's still trans people out there who are going to have to deal with their crap because I refuse to deal with it today. They're going to have to deal with it tomorrow, right? So even though, like you mentioned, Jeff, there's no instant switch where I'm going to have one conversation and change someone entirely, I'm at least going to do my part to plant that seed so that maybe one day this person can have their eyes opened and not be as big a danger to the world as they were before. So thanks for this conversation, guys. Any closing remarks from you guys are welcome.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.